Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Gayo, Add Oil Chinatown, an artist talk on public art and neighborhood recovery. I want to thank everyone for being here today. My name is Jenny Leung. I'm the executive director of the Chinese Culture Center. We are a 55-year-old arts and culture organization based in San Francisco's Chinatown, dedicated to building strong, vibrant communities through the arts. It's more important than ever to support artists, support the community and recovery efforts, and to uplift the voices of the community that have been greatly impacted by COVID-19 and systemic racism. Arts are an essential part of the recovery period to bring us together, give us hope, and inspire the future. Before we begin the program, I want to give a special thank you to our committed partners and wonderful supporters who make the Chinese Culture Center's work in the community and risk-taking art possible. First and foremost, I want to give a shout out to our board leadership for their support and for being here today. Thanks to the support of the Community Challenge Grant Program, Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, San Francisco Foundation, San Francisco Grants for the Arts, San Francisco Arts Commission, the Wells Fargo Foundation, Fleischacker Foundation, and all of our individual donors and CCC contemporaries. Thank you. And if you are so inspired today, please consider a donation. Your support will go towards supporting emerging artists and community engagement. The link to our website is in the chat box. Would now like to introduce Hoi Leung, CCC's fierce curator, who has been bringing such energy, freshness, and joy to the arts at the intersection of arts, community, and global identity. Hoi leads a young artistic team who are the creative spirit of the organization, and Hoi's vision for community care is truly exciting, and I'm proud to introduce her as our moderator tonight to kick off this program. Take it away, Hoi.
Thank you, Jenny. I'm so happy to be here and be in community with everyone here. So today's talk is about providing a forum to look at the artwork and listen to the artists who participated in a series of contemporary public art that took place in Chinatown. As a curator, I always feel so lucky to be able to support artistic programmings that take place in Chinatown. I see this neighborhood as a contemporary, vibrant, and dynamic space with an awesome history of social resilience. Every day, its residents, small businesses, social and health services, housing, all work together in an incredible network to make sure that Chinatown remains a home for intergenerational families, immigrants, seniors, and the working class. For many of us, and like many of you, COVID and racism have brought on a sense of hopelessness, anxiety, but also provided a space to reflect on how we can connect with public spaces and one another. That is why when 100 Days Action first reached out about the project that they were doing called Art for Essential Workers back in May, CCC was very happy to be involved in some capacity as a community liaison. The nature of the project is that they would pair artists and businesses to put artwork up on boarded storefronts as a way to energize the community and its frontline workers. For them to partner with partners such as Chinatown Visitor Information Center with the artists, this set of artwork in Chinatown is a statement of hope and outlook for the future. There was a moment where temporary public art became a gesture of urgent care to a beloved neighborhood in crisis. So we have a very exciting program for everyone tonight. First, we'll have our presenter, Jeremiah Barber from 100 Days Action. Then it's Chelsea Wong and JENIFER Walford making presentation about the artworks, followed by a Q&A session. So some house rules before we get started. Because the stream is on YouTube, so feel free to use the chat function to ask questions, and we will select a few to ask the artists at the end of the talk. Feel free to put things like hearts, smiley faces, and gayao, add oil to show support to the community and our panelists. Shout out to our comments moderators, YY and Wei Ying, who are part of the CCC team, to keep the chats a safe space. So without further ado, I would love to introduce our first presenter, who is a member of 100 Days Action and the lead for the Art for Essential Worker project. 100 Days Action is a Bay Area artist collective that produces creative resistant projects to build community at the intersection of art, activism, and social engagement. Formed immediately after the 2016 presidential election in response to Trump's 100-day plan, the collective collaborates with local and national artists on exhibitions, performances, protests, and group actions that stand against bigotry, xenophobia, racism, sexism, and the destruction of the environment. 100 Days Action presents interactive projects, installation, and events that prompt civic engagement and ask visitors to directly embody and envision the future they want to see. Jeremiah, who's a member of the group, is an artist, educator, organizer whose work is socially driven and wilderness inclined. He uses performance and sculpture to explore perception and systems of belief. So take it away, Jeremiah.
Oh, thank you, Hoi, for that introduction. Thanks so much to the Chinese Cultural Center for having us. And I'm really excited to be talking with Chelsea and Jennifer today. I'm going to go ahead and see if we can get my slides open here. Oops. To the beginning. Are you seeing that okay? Okay, great. So I'm here with 100 Days Action. We're a 10-member collective, and we are made up of artists and educators and designers and curators. So we're a pretty broad group, and we formed in 2016. We make work between art and civic action. So I'm gonna take this opportunity to remind everyone they need to register to vote. If they have not already, request your mail-in ballot, get it soon. I'm gonna be talking a little bit about the project's origins and just show a few images of some of the other pieces in the series. We ended up putting up 23 of these pieces and have one more that's still to go up. The project started when someone that lived in the Mission in the very first week of the quarantine contacted us and said that there are boarded up storefronts everywhere. And I had no idea. I hadn't left my house at that point. He wanted to know if we would be interested in organizing artists to hang work on the boarded up storefronts. Of course, there were a lot of other artists who started doing that immediately. One of the things that kind of differentiates the initiative that we put together was that early on, as we were talking to businesses, there was concern, first of all, whether it was legal for us to even be outside. And then the other thing is that our mission that we decided on, the message that we settled on, was that we wanted to make messages directly in support of essential workers, messages that would go out to people that had to be outside. And so for us, we felt like we wanted to have a process that would allow us to minimize exposure to artists. And so we, instead of having, maybe the more traditional mural paintings, we decided that we would have digital prints of work and that we could wheat paste them up and they would go up much quicker, and that we could kind of make a more calculated risk, choose what time they would go up, and they would go up in a couple of hours. So wheat paste is just a really simple adhesive process of applying a print. So all of our pieces are wheat pasted up on these boarded up storefronts. We worked in partnership with the businesses. We usually would get a kind of a pool of submissions from artists, both artists that we'd worked with in the past, and then with our primary partner, which is the Facebook art department. And Facebook had provided us with a whole group of artists, a lot of new artists to us that we hadn't worked with before. And through Facebook funding, we were able to pay the artists. We were able to provide this as a service to the businesses, completely free of charge to them. And so what we do is we get submissions, we'd show them to the businesses, we'd get something that would fit with them, something that would spread a message that they wanted to be, they wanted to put out there. So it was a nice way to kind of create a partnership. And we were primarily working in the Mission and in Chinatown. So I'm showing pieces from both here. And partially that was because Facebook had connections to some organizations. So I just want to give a quick shout out to George and Amanda at the Chinese Newcomers Service Center, Ava at the Chinatown Merchants Association, and especially Ben Chan at the Chinatown Visitor Information Center. These folks were all hugely instrumental in helping us find spaces and track down business owners who were not necessarily, not necessarily on site at the time. So sometimes a little harder to contact. We do have another panel for our Chinatown series, so I just wanted to include a couple images of those works here. If you're available on August 29th, I believe it is, we're going to hear from Jocelyn and also Christine Wong Yap. So, and then last, I just want to do just a quick introduction to the two artists that I was so thrilled to have on board for this. Jennifer Wofford, I've known Jennifer's work for many years. I think originally was introduced to her work via performance. And something that I just find really captivating about Jennifer's work is the way in which a sense of community is kind of woven into all of her practice, and kind of no matter what medium she's working in. So especially this year, in which I feel like our relationships are becoming so much of what we're depending on right now. I really look to your work as I think about ways in which art can function a little bit differently right now, and kind of fill in the gaps of what kind of outreach we need, and like how to make connections with people. And then Chelsea's work, I'm just like really excited to hear from you about your painting process. I just feel like this is the kind of work that I want to be looking at right now. There's so much joy in your painting process, and this sense of plurality and the color and the connection that you make between figures. It was really exciting to be able to pair you with a site that you had some background, so I'll let you talk about that. But I'm also just really interested in this, the kind of relationship that you draw between flatness and then also depth that you create within patterns. So I'm really thrilled to hear from both of you, and it's been great to work with you. So I think we're hearing from Chelsea first.
Yes. So up next we have Chelsea Wong. Thank you, Jeremiah, for your presentation. I think it's always nice to hear where the function of art starts and ends, and whether public intervention can really excite some of the conversation about the function of art, and especially now. So up next we have Chelsea Wong. Chelsea Ryoko Wong is a painter and muralist whose vibrant figure composition reflect the diversity and style of her home in San Francisco. Through the use of watercolor technique, Wong creates busy scenes of people drawing from real life events and her imagination. Evoking a sense of curiosity and wonder, Wong's heavily stylized and idyllic painting encourage acceptance, joy, openness to the world we live in. Wong began her study at Parsons School of Design and finished at California College of the Arts. She's the first recipient of the Hamaguchi Emerging Artist Fellowship at CALA, and has recently completed a mural for the Facebook Artist in Residence program in San Francisco. So let's welcome Chelsea.
Hi, everybody. First off, thanks so much for having me. And I guess I'm just going to talk a little bit about my process and the art that I do, and how I was able to kind of apply that style to this project. So bear with me while I share my screen. Can you guys see that? Yes? Okay, so I was really excited to do this project. I was excited to get paired with Hans Wonton because I love to eat there. And yeah, I mean, I'm like, oh, wow, of all the places that I could have been paired with, what are the odds that I got paired with this delicious restaurant that's always been so special to me? I worked in the financial district for a long time, and I would go to work early just to go eat noodles out of my way and then go to work afterwards. So when Jeremiah told me that this was happening, I was like, oh my goodness, this is just so exciting. Also, my aunt, I have some family who lives here, and so my aunt, she's also obsessed with Hans. And then when my parents are in town, we all go there. So it was just a really special thing. So the first slide you guys are looking at is just the exterior of the restaurant. And I like to think of my pieces. Well, I thought the way I wanted to approach this piece was to kind of make something that felt like the restaurant in a way that kind of created a space. So a lot of times what I do is I will research places online because I couldn't access this place because it was already boarded up when I started. And ooh, okay. Uh-oh. I'm on next slide. There we go. So I will look on like Google Images and Yelp and Instagram tagged photos and just kind of, or Google, now Google does reviews. So people post pictures of restaurants or any interior space. And anyways, it's wonderful because you get to see what things look like without even having access to the place. So this is what the interior of the restaurant looks like. So they have these little countertop seats and then these yellow tables and those lanterns at the top. And then I don't know what you would call this tiled floor, but I was using this as reference. And then this woman who's working there, I'm like, I hope she had permission for that photo, but I don't think so. So then with those things in mind, this is the painting that I created. So I'm primarily a watercolor, I use watercolor and gouache to create my paintings, and I work on paper. So the elements of the restaurant, I wanted to just kind of integrate that into a painting. And if you also, I don't know if you guys can see me, I think you can, but behind me is the physical painting. So I use the dimensions of the space that the boarded up area would be, and then I kind of shrunk it down to create this painting that would be the same size when blown up to scale. So the painting, as you can see, it incorporates a lot of the same elements as the restaurant. And so I wanted it to be something where people who could walk by would feel like they were reminded of that space and that they felt like there was something familiar about it, but maybe something new and kind of interesting in a way too, where I'm taking this interior space and putting on the exterior of the building, but it's also obviously my artistic interpretation of the space. So the way that I work, and I know that I don't have a ton of time to talk about this, but I start from the background and I move forward. So I use that kind of gray wash in the background. So that's like the first layer, and then I'll tape it off and put like the yellow section, and then I'll tape it off and do like kind of that brick tile at the bottom. So at the beginning of the painting just looks like 3 kind of strips of color, and then I kind of work to the foreground, and I'll do the people last. And then I wanted to integrate more diversity into this painting, and also a little bit of social distancing. They're a little spread out. And so that's what the painting looked like blown up to scale and then wheat pasted onto the building. So I thought that it was kind of, I just thought this is like a fun thing for people to see if they walk by, and just, especially if they're familiar with the restaurant. Here's just another photo without the man who's walking by. And then here's just a close-up. So I love that you guys did that Jeremiah and the team did such a good job of wheat pasting it like very accurately onto the door. And I think that you told me I sent you the largest file in resolution, which was funny and awesome. I really wanted people to feel like they were looking at a watercolor painting. And then this is just some of my other work. So a lot of times I do integrate Chinatown elements into my work. So this is supposed to be like a dim sum shop. And then these paintings are smaller. I would say that the scale of this was probably like 14 by 20 inches, something like that. And then here's another older dim sum painting. So throughout the years, I kind of have these dim sum, like a lot of similar things with lanterns and food and the pink bags. And here's another one that's going to be for a show with the Chinese Cultural Center. And this is about Lipo Lounge and the kind of the history of Chinatown and LGBT. So just one more slide is mural. This is a mural that I did with the Facebook Artist in Residency program. And then this mural is hand painted. So unlike the wheat pasting element, this is essentially a giant painting on a wall that I did. And then just one thing left of the wonton soup. So thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea, for the wonderful picture of the wonton. I'm so thankful that I'm in Chinatown today, so I can just walk by and pick it up on my way home. But you brought up some really good points. It doesn't happen very often, but when the public art, when the public art aligns with the site and you have personal feelings about the site that you're working in, it becomes a very special moment. And it's also that almost like public art cannot not be site specific too. So I'm so happy that everything lined up for Hans Wonton and for you as well. And so next, we have JENIFER Walford. So JENIFER is a San Francisco artist and educator whose work plays with notions of hybridity, authenticity, and global culture, often with a humorous bent. She's also 1/3 of the Filipino-American artist trio Mail Order Brides. Walford's projects have been presented locally at the Berkeley Art Museum, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, and Minnesota Street Project, and further afield at DePaul Museums in Chicago. And she has some exciting projects coming up in the city as well. So let's welcome JENIFER.
Hi, thanks for having me here. It's good to see everybody and to not see the rest of you, but to sense your presence. I just want to give a big shout out to Hans Wonton House as well, because I fell in love with that place when I was in a group show at the Chinese Culture Center earlier in the year. So because it was just around the corner, I became sort of fixated on it. And as soon as I had seen Chelsea's painting and I saw the yellow countertops, I was like, oh, I know where she was at. And so I just want to say thank you for doing that. Let me, I think I also just loved Chelsea's use of color. And so as I share my screen here, where are we here? I think that that's a theme that kind of has come up in my work as well. And I don't think that it always has, but it is where I'm at these days. I think over the past few years, my projects have been increasingly about trying to sort of amplify a sense of joy and energy, but through my own absurdist way of doing that. And that's actually how I got to know Jeremiah through 100 Days Action, or that was one other 100 Days Action connection. It was through some work that I did that was more performative with them. Anyway, where are we at? I'm going to tab through the piece that was actually fairly short-lived in Chinatown, which was Jiayou or Gaiyao, depending on which way you're going with the pronunciation. I had been working in a similar aesthetic, which I'll tab through in a second to explain more about. But Jeremiah paired me with lookbook jewelry, and it ended up working out quite nicely. I'd been not only working with this particular palette and design vocabulary, but I'd also been working with these speech bubbles. And I had not originally known what to put in one or if I was even going to use one up until right before I sent the file to Jeremiah for printing. I was actually waffling as to whether to include it or not. And at the end of the day, I feel like it added another nice energetic moment. Side note for me, I grew up partially in Hong Kong. I speak a minor amount of Cantonese, and I'm fumbling my way through trying to learn Mandarin these days. And so for me to try to engage with language in this other way felt like another nice gesture. And of course, this is one of those expressions that is, when you're a learner or when you're a native speaker, it has just a nice energy to it. And so that's partly why I went ahead and just took the risk of using it. Here's another view of it. And here's the side view of it. Let me just set my timer before I forget here. So what's happening here is the current place in the trajectory that begins with this project I started last fall, in which you can actually see as my weird backdrop behind me here in my art studio where I'm projecting to you from. In September 2019, I built this large installation project called Club Rupture, and I was situating this project in 1989 at the moment of the Loma Prieta earthquake here in the Bay Area. And as we're apparently in the middle of another Bay Area cataclysm, like, let's just keep rolling with this. But I was very deliberately looking at a late 80s or mid to late 80s aesthetic to try to situate things there. It first started in some smaller paintings where you can see the first emergence of these speech bubbles. And as I continued to work with it, I wanted to fragment it and create this installation that would become a set piece for a TV dance party set at the moment of the Loma Prieta earthquake. And so This is just a very brief clip of that.
You're watching Club Rupture. We'll be right back after these messages.
So I'm constantly, let's keep going here. I'm constantly looking for ways to engage and energize the folks that I want to connect with. So after doing this installation for a small space in the Mission called Black and White Projects, I ended up being invited to do a proposal for the Asian Art Museum to do a large mural on their new Hyde Street art wall. And so I ended up proposing something that was suspiciously similar to Club Rupture, but with more Asian themed elements. And I think it was just the continuing obsession I had with the year 1989, with these notions of rupture. And I think just an exuberance and an absurdity that I gravitate towards in that aesthetic. Most of the pieces, most of the patterns in this particular mural are far more specific than the ones in the Club Rupture project. And you see the echoes of this particular project in the work that I ended up doing for the Chinatown mural. So here's a slight close-up where you can see that in the speech bubbles, in this particular instance of my work, the speech bubbles are all shout outs to Asian American artists that were very, very active in the Bay Area. All of these artists were born before 1940. Some of them got acclaim, and some of them I think have not gotten as much acclaim as they deserve. And so as you look at these names and you don't recognize them, that is your invitation to look them up and learn more about how amazing they are. And the patterns in this particular mural, again, which you see echoed in the Chinatown project, are things that are either quoted from the Asian Art Museum's collection or design patterns, design and craft tradition patterns that come up in some of the Asian communities adjacent to the museum. And so that is what's happening there. And what you're seeing in this last slide is basically what hopefully will someday be the mural on the outside of the Asian Art Museum. I completed the panels for this mural, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago, but because since the pandemic, everything's been in a holding pattern, the panels have yet to be installed. So as I move you back and forth through time really quickly, just so that you can see the trajectory of this work, that is how we get to this particular iteration of what I'm, excited about continuing in various other forms. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Jennifer. I think as you're giving your presentation, I noticed something about both you and Chelsea's work is how it really accommodates to a person walking on the streets. I think like every step you take, you're like, oh, look at this other person eating noodles, or look at this pattern right here. And then like you take the next step, it's like, oh, this is a totally different pattern. I think something about that kind of you as like the timer or something, and you have this like weird experience just to like kind of have this like subconscious attack of art, even if you're not explicitly looking at it from forward. I think that's really how people in Chinatown have really experienced the work by walking past it. Not in a shady way.
Awesome.
So now we'll get into just asking you guys some questions, and I will throw this back to the audience as well. If you guys have any questions for the artists, drop them into the YouTube chat, and then we will poll some kind of burning curiosities that the audience might have. And so with the first question for you guys, so I think your works are both very elemental in uplifting spirits by color and design. Is that something you consciously think about when you make your work, or is that something that you particularly address to when you work in the public space? And if Jennifer can share first, and then Chelsea and Jeremiah, if you have anything to add as a curator about this topic.
I think for a number of years, I wasn't as consciously engaged with color, quite frankly. And I realized in the past few years of, I think honestly, it started after the 2016 election when everybody just lost their complete sense of humor, and we entered a state of what seems to be never-ending anxiety and fear and rage. I found that all of a sudden I really was interested in color as an uplifting experience. And so it sort of became a very important part of performances I was doing, where like, people who were engaged in, I wouldn't even call them performances so much as showing up at protests, but being in bright yellow instead of like gray and just mad all the time. So, and as I've continued into other projects, I've found that I just feel better and happier and more energized when I'm working with intense color. And it's kind of a late in life revelation for me, quite frankly.
Yeah, I'll add to that I think color can just be very positive and it can evoke a lot of emotions. So I really like every color in the rainbow, and there's no bad colors for me. So I really am obsessed with patterns and colors, if you can't tell. And it's very, it's a central focus of all of my work. And I just feel like I love colors. Like, I've talked about this in other talks where I'll pick two ugly colors and then I'll try to challenge myself to bring in a third color to make those colors work. So it's just part of the way that I think, and my work is about being positive and joyful and having that in your life. So the use of color will really help that for me. But also with this, and for my project, there was no question about adding color to it for the Hans Wonton mural. But also I thought that Chinatown is actually one of my favorite neighborhoods because it has so many patterns and colors, but where this mural is actually located in Chinatown is kind of like, I don't want to say on the outskirts, but it's on a street that's actually a little bit more drab and it's more gray because you're kind of butting up with the financial district. So I thought that it would be fun to add a lot of color so that people feel like they're really seeing an artwork when they walk by versus like an advertisement or something, or versus just gray. Like I felt like it would be very eye-catching and fun.
Yeah, I guess while we're just on the purely technical aspects of your practice, I'm really interested in like patterning and the idea that it's kind of coded a little bit in both of your work, or that there's like references that maybe you expect some people to get and you don't expect everyone to get immediately. I'm wondering if you can say something about your expectations with these pieces.
Yeah, I can talk about it. I definitely think that's a really interesting observation just because I do feel like there are patterns in my work where I feel like some people will understand versus, but maybe not everybody. For example, I went to Tibet in 2019, and when I was there, there's a lot of patterns there, and it's like very simple. It's like I guess in this piece actually, you have these colors like the prayer flag colors that you can see at the top. So I always think of that when I see these colors, but I'm not sure other people will notice that. And then when I look at JENIFER's work, like I love the thing that all the patterns outside the museum, because in all the Asian cultures, and I'm half Japanese, half Chinese, you do have these reoccurring patterns, which I will also take some of those elements and put them in my own work. And I think that there's an interesting dialogue between our practices in that aspect. So.
Totally. I'm still having this hilarious moment of like, why have we never met before, girl? But yes, as I took what was a sort of, in my mind, a fairly generic 80s aesthetic of, repeating patterns and started, developing it further. And very specifically, once I got to the Asian Art Museum iteration of this project, it became an interesting game of looking for specific patterns that other, folks in the community would kind of recognize, but they wouldn't be exactly as you might have seen them in context. And I also think in certain cases, I was just very wary of being a culture vulture. Like there's this way in which it's really, I don't care whether you're a person of color or not, there are just certain things that are not quite right to poach unless you are, you're engaged with this work really mindfully. And so as I was taking, a pattern from maybe an indigenous, tribe from the Philippines, even as somebody who's half Filipino, I can't lay a, ethical claim to that. And so it was really about finding a way to stylize it in a way that was an homage without being a cultural appropriation.
Yeah, and I think that's especially good to consider in public art when there's a whole aspects of engagement that is rather invisible. Instead of being in a museum or in a gallery where you're in a way taken care of in your experience of seeing art to a certain degree. When it's in a public space, I think it really heightens an artist's consideration for the patterns and the symbols and ideas that they decide to have onto their work. And I'm wondering a little bit too with Jeremiah, have you seen like, with kind of like bridging the gap between the artist's proposals and then kind of the community and the businesses, can you share a little bit more about that process and how much that plays into consideration?
It really varies quite a bit with these projects, because there would be anything from just an immediate recognition that like something was like perfect for a business owner's space to, you know, to kind of a longer dialogue of the history of the location and what was fit. So I think with both of these pieces, it was a very kind of immediate reaction that both these business owners had to these work, and they were super excited and completely on board behind them. So yeah, I think that it kind of depends on the space, but these were really quite straightforward.
And as artists, do you guys feel like there's an anxiety about nobody's there to explain your work to a certain degree? Yeah, I think once it's out there, it's out there. it's really like even like an argument with the audience, right? It's a dialogue and also a challenge and an argument, and something productive happens in between all of that discourse or feelings of being uplifted and encouraged. So my second question for you guys is actually because we know we have a lot of emerging artists tuning in, and we're seeing that that the pandemic really influenced the way that arts are being shown, especially in thinking about, one, the public space, and two, almost have this like urgency to it. They're temporary public art, you know, they're not multi-year projects where you really deeply invested in a community and then you kind of make work. But it's really about that sense of urgency, that sense of needing to be in front of someone and have a message out. And we're seeing these as viable ways in which exhibitions can happen. You know, these works goes up for 1 or 2 months, and which is typically the length of any show. So would you, can you guys share a little bit about any tips or suggestions about like how do you see this shift, and how might someone enter into this realm?
I guess I can talk. I think then I'm talking. Yeah, I think it's interesting because obviously when you're just starting as an artist, you're like, can you please give me a show, a group show or something, you know? And it's really private in terms of galleries and working in that whole world and navigating that. But it's interesting to see all these public artworks everywhere. It's beautiful, it's awesome. And I think that if you're just starting out, I always suggest to people to say yes to opportunities, because it's exposure. You don't know who's going to see your work and what could happen. There's a lot of magic in just viewing an image. So if there's opportunities that come by like this, then say yes, do something that you feel excited about and put it into the world.
I think this is one of the most exciting times I can think of in the history of art, for public art, in the sense that, okay, maybe I just don't know that much about the history of public art, but I do feel like really since the pandemic and since all these storefronts were shuttered, and just the proliferation of all sorts of very spontaneous outbursts of art, not just because of that, but also because of all the protests that have been happening since May, June, for George Floyd, for Breonna Taylor. And I think that it has just this incredibly beautiful moment of people just feeling like they need to visually engage. When I think about how much extraordinary, poignant portraiture has come out of, the actions and protests in and around Black Lives Matter, I just think, God, that's just incredible. Like, I'm already teaching this stuff in my classes. We're just going to see the after effects of this for many years to come. And there are so many storefronts, like you do not have to wait for somebody to invite you. Ideally, you talk to a store owner and get, permission and engage in that way. But so many people are so grateful for you to engage in this work. You may or may not get paid the first round or two of this, but that's not always the point. At some point as an artist, you should get paid, yes. But I think part of getting the benefits of any community is contributing to it. You don't show up and start asking and taking. So I just think that's a really important part of the balance of things.
Yeah, I guess I'll say that I think that flexibility, I might have mentioned this in my introduction, that like flexibility is so important, and especially important right now. And like with our project, we started with kind of one idea in mind, and everything just kind of continued to extend. And so when the protests began over George Floyd's murder, and there was a huge response from people just to go out and write messages on boards, we took a pause in that moment where we realized that the meaning of the boards themselves and what messages those could convey had shifted and had immediately changed from what it was at the beginning of the quarantine. And so we tried to be reactive to that. So I feel like art is a series of relationships, and it doesn't matter what your medium it is. And so if you're interested in public art, it's especially important. The Black Cultural Zone in Oakland is one of the groups that we have got to meet through this project, and they've done a really amazing job of forming a kind of a parallel but very different kind of project around how to create art as a political action. They're doing ongoing mural work on this topic as well.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And we actually have a question from the chat by Christine. She's asking a little bit about how you guys' thinking changed, because this is precisely a temporary project rather than a permanent one. If Jennifer want to share a little bit first, because I feel like you're juggling both right now.
I'm sorry, because I have what?
Oh, because you're juggling both right now, the temporary and the permanent. It's like, am I thinking this work to last 2 weeks to 1 month, or this work will last as long as?
I don't ever worry about that, honestly. I think, I don't know if that's just partly because of the occasional performance work I do. Probably not. Maybe I'm just short-sighted. But I've never been concerned with the longevity or archival sort of pristine nature of a project. I think that its immediacy is, will still have all sorts of after effects. But I do think you have to be adaptable. As I continue to hone this aesthetic that I'm super engaged with, I find that there's just ways that I have to keep calibrating and finding ways that it actually is authentically connected to the moment. I think it's really tremendously egotistical as an artist to just apply your own ego to, especially in public space, to something without responsiveness. Yeah, so it's just continuing to figure out how to do that and just slowly calibrate as I go.
I like that. I think that for sure, I feel like maybe the opposite, where, or just in some of what you were saying, where I definitely feel like I approached this project differently than I would have approached a more permanent project. I think just for me, I felt like, I was like, okay, maybe in some ways it was a little freeing to think about how ephemeral this project was. If they had said, can you do an image on the side of the building that's going to be there for the, indefinitely, I think I would have gone in my head a little bit more about, okay, what's the real message that I want to send? What's this, what's that, what's that? But the fact that this was like, okay, we don't know if it's going to be up there for a week, less than a week, a month, whatever, but I know that it's temporary. That kind of allowed me to explore that space, really think about that specific space in a different way than I think I would have approached other projects.
Great.
I just want to give a shout out to Jeremiah's cat.
Yeah, I'm trying to hold back from mentioning the cat, but it's much needed right now. And let me throw in another audience question, okay? So one audience member asked, I would like to ask about the sense of publicness. Do you think there are any sense of publicness from your side as artists and from the side of Chinatown residents after or since the pandemic? Does it change the way you approach your work, and how?
Publicness?
Yeah, publicness. I think it's about like our relationship with public spaces. I think right now there's a sense of fear. People are afraid to be outside and feel, or feelings around it change. And obviously if the art exists outside, then it means that the venue for this work has changed in nature. I think maybe I'll start by answering from the Chinatown resident side to kick off, and then I'll pop it to the artists. So for Chinatown, I think that for Chinatown it's very special because the idea of public and private has always been sort of queer in so many ways, right? Because it's so densely populated, and with the public housing and the SRO, which is single room occupancy, where families would stay in small rooms and they would share bathrooms and kitchens. And in fact, we just learned of an outbreak that was reported yesterday in Chinatown, and it was something that people really feared, and it happened. And now it's really taking the action to support the community in some way. And so with that kind of density, and also China has one of the fewest public facilities in San Francisco as a neighborhood as well. So the parks become so sacred. The parks, the alleyways, anywhere where you can hang your clothes, chill, play music. So that's why all the time you walk into Chinatown, there would be music playing, people dancing. There would be funeral marches, lion dancing, and all of that. So of course, with the pandemic, actually the kind of some of the sensory, some of the senses of Chinatown has changed. I think you don't hear certain things, you don't smell certain things, right? You don't see certain things. So I think for sure, any opportunity from my end, at least, to support this project and have these sort of visual activation in the community is much needed. And I think for us as an organization, we're still studying how to do it. So I think that's my little tick from the Chinatown side. But if the artists can react a little bit about how you guys are feeling about, how to deal with public spaces today. Maybe Chelsea can go.
Yeah, I just want to echo that what you were saying about Chinatown and spaces. Like it's Chinatown's one of my favorite neighborhoods because you have these different layers there. So you have like the street level and the retail spaces, and sometimes it can feel very touristy. And then you kind of have the residences that are upstairs. So if you have the opportunity to get higher and see balcony level, you can kind of see into people's houses. You can see laundry. You can see like the way of living. And then there's also the underground subterranean Chinatown, which I've never had the opportunity to go into, but I hope to one day. But I think that with just that there's so much happening in Chinatown. Like you said, in the parks, people are exercising, they're singing, they're celebrating, and they're playing games or cards or whatever. And then having public art just adds one more dimension to that. And like I was talking about earlier, me taking an inside space and kind of making it a public outside space, but through a different perspective, I try to contribute to another layer, something else that people can enjoy, and try to kind of activate the space that if you just walk by a boarded up building that maybe has like graffiti or whatever on it, then maybe it doesn't feel like anything special. But if you walk by a building that has art on it that's meant to make you feel joyful or remind you of this place, then I think that that's very interesting and dynamic for the public, or at least that's what I hope.
Yeah, I feel like I generally don't feel like art has to be joyful, and yet in this moment and in our particular context, and in terms of public art, I mean, yeah, I'm just, even as I'm saying it, I'm hedging a little bit, but I think that it depends on the nature of the project, because I think that art should and is often a good outlet for, focusing rage, but in that rage, it's often about love. If we go back to some of the, the protest art that's been happening, since George Floyd, I would hardly call some of it joyful, but I think it's coming from a place of really deep, deep love still. I think in the case of, I don't know where I'm at as somebody who's, hoping to keep engaging in more public work, I think that I personally feel like a duty to bring more positive energy to the space. I can't always predict what that means, but I do know that it involves, I think, continuing to listen and pay attention to what is happening in any given community I might be engaging with. yeah, and just be as honest as I can be with myself as to whether what I want to do is actually the right thing for that situation. I think that one of the things that's been happening in public art this summer that is both wonderful and terrible is also like the ongoing saga of the honey bears that are everywhere in San Francisco now. They're like a scourge, and yet people love them. And so I know some artists in the city absolutely can't stand the honey bear thing, but I'm like, you know what? It is giving people joy. They're very calming, and I'm not here to be a snob about that. I think they're doing far more good than harm, even if they're not my thing. And so I feel like that is the space of public art. A lot of people want public art to be a happy, joyful, pleasant, pretty thing. And I'm not here to sort of, conceptualize that too much.
I guess I would speak to the public moment for me right now. I'm feeling both as an artist and then also as part of this group, 100 Days Action. Like as an artist, I think that I've become a much more interior artist, and I've turned towards writing and journaling, and kind of the thought process is part of the work that I'm not so eager to be making things right now. But 100 Days Action has always been this separate thing for me that is very engaged with people outside. And I guess just the thing that I can add, having been out to install these works, is that it's been really interesting to see, first of all, I mean, the overwhelmingly positive response of people, and just the immediacy with which people respond to these works as they're being hung. People walking by, like stopping to look at them, saying something to us, and just like praising the works is really remarkable. I mean, speaking to artists, that for the most part, you don't get that experience of engaging with people. Even if you do a public artwork, you're not necessarily there for that moment of that initial response that people have. And so that has been really positive for me, just to be able to, I feel a little bad for taking that away from you all, but I can share with you that people just love the work, and so that was a really good experience to be able to be there for that moment.
Yeah.
Jump back in for 1 second and just say that, yes, you were just reminding me of this particular summer where I was assisting the muralist Johanna Potek on a mural in the Tenderloin. And it was, it's pretty rough and tumble corner, but it was this really amazing experience of just really, I think, on the most street level situation possible, seeing what people in the community were thinking about, how they were responding to what we were doing. And I know that it has shaped my thinking extremely, now that I'm remembering, about how that public aspect of art exists.
Yeah, I think as you guys were talking about it, also kind of brought up the idea of it, kind of what is almost like the parameter of quote unquote the public. I think if you were to raid my sidewalk and put a piece of art that is so challenging for me that it's not pleasant, it's not uplifting, but it's critical and challenging in some way, I would be like, wow, and if it's in my home, I would be like, in some way. So I think for Chinatown in particular too, it's like people see, maybe the park is their home, it kind of maybe extends a little bit out, just because it's public doesn't, or maybe just because it's exterior doesn't mean it's, it's quite a public space. It could very much mean like it's a private space and people see it as a part of their home or an extension of their home. So I think when working in Chinatown in particular, I think there's that kind of consideration of like, where do you even draw the lines of how intrusive, public art can be. But I think all in all, there's been such an openness and positivity about it. And in fact, some of the comments are, shouting out to you guys being awesome artists, and also loving seeing the visual activism that's been going on in Chinatown in many ways. And then also some questions about supporting artists like you guys during this time. And maybe that's a question from me as well. So how do we support you better? What kind of things do you guys interested in? And maybe we'll keep it within the universe of public art. As artists, what kind of support do you need when you're doing these projects? We'll start with Chelsea.
Sure. Well, yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I think giving artists spaces, public spaces to create and to work is always a form of support. I really enjoyed the 100 Days Action Project because Jeremiah wheat pasted my art for me. So when you were saying, oh, you didn't have the interaction of the public, I was like, oh, that's okay. Because at the time I really didn't want to leave my art studio and I really wanted to just have the safety of my studio. And I think that I really appreciated that aspect of the project. So that was a great form of support, especially just during COVID right now. It is really interesting time to be indoors versus outdoors or in public spaces, or there's many different concerns happening with everything. So yeah, I would say just continue to, if you have public spaces or organizations, work with artists. If you guys want art, that's great. It's wonderful.
Yeah, everything that Chelsea said times two. And I think additionally, what was I trying to think of that might be something else? A lot of it was, honestly, I mean, most of us as artists exist in these weird vacuums and we don't always get people giving us direct validation for what we're doing. And whether that's as simple as, if it's social media or if it's, God, this old thing called email, wherever it is, like that you engage with artists and actually tell them that you appreciate their work. I think especially in situations like this where, I mean, honestly, the politics of the art world are still such that we've got a couple of women of color artists here. And that is its own, we could talk a lot about that. That's another hour-long conversation around the fact that you should give us more support. But additionally, as all of us are doing work that is engaged in sort of communities that have often gotten overlooked, I think that you just have to be really vocal in your support for those kinds of projects, whether that's with the public, like with the Arts Commission or with other organizations, that you turn out for those kinds of things. It only will reinforce the idea that we need to do more of that.
Thank you. Noted, noted, and noted. And I think we're kind of hitting up against the time we have for today. And actually, this is another question by our good friend, Christine. And it'll actually perfectly segue into the, I know it's like, hello. It'll perfectly segue into the final question. So is it important for people who don't live in Chinatown and aren't Chinese to care about the future of Chinatown? I think I'll hand it off to you guys first. Maybe Jeremiah can take this one first, and then Jennifer and Chelsea.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, it's important. I think that one thing, if I can speak as the white person not from San Francisco, I've been here 10 years, but I've felt my relationship to my neighborhoods change over the last couple of months. And so this project, among the other things that have been happening this year, have been very eye-opening in terms of what our relationship is to our city and our communities, and where we need to be paying attention. So I think that's absolutely the case, that we need to be actively seeking out the legacy of Chinatown and the artists that have already built connections there, and the organizations that are already working there, and the partnerships. I mean, there are so many organizations that we talk to through this process, and virtually all of them said the same thing at some point down the road, which is like, there are long-standing dialogues that you, as someone from the outside, are not getting. You're not going to know these things. And so we just, we tried to approach those with just trying to form relationships that could be responsive. And I think that that's something that every arts organizer needs to be thinking about.
I'll add into that just that I think that, yeah, of course, that everyone should care about Chinatown. But I'm into the preservation of the city, and I think that Chinatown is something that makes San Francisco so important, and it makes it so special. So we should all care. I live in the Mission, and I care about my neighborhood. I care about all the neighborhoods, but like now we're in a time and a place now, and you never know what's going to happen at any point, right? So it's very important to honor these spaces and honor these neighborhoods and the cultures that are there, and do our part to contribute to it and to contribute to like the flourishment and prosperity.
Yeah, I'm going to say yes times 3. Yes, we should care about Chinatown, even if we are not living in Chinatown. But I think to that, I just think, what was I thinking about? Something that Jeremiah just said reminded me, you just have to meet people where they're at. Like, I think it is a form of cultural arrogance to come in and impose yourself on a community, or to declare that you are going to protect them for their own sake. There's just a lot of weird things attached to that that are not quite how things should be done, in my opinion. So I think you come into a situation with respect for, how things have been going. But I also feel like no community is or should be dipped in amber and preserved in one static way. I don't think that's healthy for the growth of any community. But I'm certainly not the person to wander in and impose that on them. It's just about being present to listen and see where things, how you can support the healthiest, happiest growth of a place.
Yeah, I think for sure. I think I think Chinatown also is very symbolic in a way that it helped me, as an immigrant from Hong Kong, to really understand what it means to be Chinese in America in a lot of ways. It's almost like a playbook, of survival, resilience, creativity, and ingenuity. It's all in Chinatown, if you're curious about learning any of those things. So I learned a lot from Chinatown as a curator. It actually, in fact, taught me how to curate within a network and a village of people. So this is the end of our talk. But I do want to throw out the absolute last question, because I want the audience member in the chat to participate with us as well. So in 3 words, what is the future of Chinatown? I'll throw mine out first, because I've been wanting to share this. I think it's inclusive, intergenerational, and creative. Those are my 3 words for Chinatown. And I'll toss it to Chelsea, Jeremiah, and Jennifer.
Mine was resilient, stronger, and tasty.
Jeremiah?
I honestly didn't write anything down for this. I didn't know I was answering this question. I just want to go back to the idea of flexibility, fluidity, and color.
Yeah, those are all words that I want to go with too. I'm going to just add adventure to this. Yeah, see where things go in an exciting way.
I love all those words. That's totally like 9 more words in my vocabulary for Chinatown than before. So I'm thankful for you guys for being here with us tonight. Claps and hearts and gayos across the chats for our speakers. And huge thanks to my team for making this happen. Currently, there's so many ways to support Chinatown. So I think YY is going to drop the link into our chats on COVID-19 resources, right? You can pay, you can volunteer, you can shop, you can eat your way to support Chinatown, which sounds pretty exciting. And then also for, I think every weekend until the 20th of September, there will be Chinatown walkway weekends where the streets will be closed, and then there might be performances here and there. And this is a perfect way to come out and support. So I hope to see everyone back for part 2 of the talk with Christine Wong Yap and Jocelyn Tsai next Saturday at 11 a.m. So thank you, everyone. Good night.